Happy Thursday, everyone. This is So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights Show. Is John and I this week. Katie is somewhere in the woods being chased by bears, I believe, right?
Hopefully not.
Or very large squirrels. One of the two. So this week, in her absence, we're going to spend some time talking about building marketing strategies with frameworks. One of the things that a lot of folks in marketing seem to have a struggle with is, particularly this time of year, is putting onto paper what the strategy is going to be for the next year. And having some kind of framework is a good way to start building out that strategy. It gives you something other than a blank sheet of paper, that lovely paralyzing feeling of, I don't know what we should be doing this year. Coming. So we're going to take a look at two frameworks, a tactical framework called Traction, and then a strategic framework, the SWOT analysis. So John, want to start off with, what is Traction other than something you're in when you severely injured yourself?
Yeah, right. We're not talking about therapy here. We're talking about trying to get some actual movement, get things growing and running. The whole Traction framework was basically taken from Gabriel Weinberg and Justin Mayers. They wrote a book called Traction a few years back. And yeah, it was ridiculous. It covered everything you could do on the marketing and sales fronts. And I have a bittersweet relationship with it because I had just done B2B Marketing Confessions, and their book was just better. Like, if I had to suggest one book to buy, I'd be like, no, buy Traction first, then buy their book. Because I had a lot of the campaigns and things right, but they got it right with the framework. They came up with a framework that makes it very easy to understand and easier to put to use. And so that's what we'll talk about for a couple minutes here, just to get you on board. There's three big components to their strategy. And the first is the 50-50 rule, which is just that you should be spending half your time trying to grow the business. Half is working on the product to make the product better, what you think it needs to be, but the other half needs to be spent on growing the business. And the pitfall for that is always, the build it and they will come argument. People think that, if you build the best product, you're going to win in the marketplace. And unfortunately, history is littered with fantastic products that, didn't make the out into the wild, usually because somebody was cheaper and faster. And so as a result, society as a whole has a crummier solution, even though better products tried and worked. And yeah, the Traction framework, I should say too, was actually built upon research with a bunch of VCs and with hundreds of startups. They went back after, the funds had closed down and said, okay, which one succeeded and why did they win? And 50-50 is one part of it, the ability to put enough work into growing the business. So that's one. So from there, you're okay, what do you do with that other 50 when you need to figure out how to grow the business? And the second component of that is called the bullseye rule. And that rule is that you only want to pick 3 channels to work in when you start at the very beginning. A big mistake that everybody makes is, they get a $50,000 marketing budget, and so they sprinkle it around in 50 different little buckets all over the place. And anybody who's been through, more than one rodeo knows that that's just complete disaster and a headache that's going to kill you. And the solution to that is you pick 3 channels, you test all 3 against each other, and hopefully, and usually, one of the 3 will have some traction, some activity. And the second one, maybe you want to try for another round. And the third one, usually you drop. And you just keep this iterative cycle going of pick one, work, and over time, you will eventually just have all of the channels. There's 21 channels in the model, and you'll have all of them. But you start with 3, and you just, as they generate a positive ROI, then you can decide to go deeper and until you hit a point of diminishing returns. But by that point, it's paying for itself and you can keep moving forward. So that's the cycle. And so then the big, of course, reveal from all this is, all right, so what are the 21 channels? Where does everything actually, come to bear, and where do you actually put your money? And so this is the updated model. Now, to be honest with this too, it's based on Gabriel and Justin's original model, but over the years, we've added different branches and changed a bunch of things as things have evolved and moved. So the overall model here breaks down into 4 channels now. Product marketing, which is, you can actually generate traction and do marketing programs by making changes to the product. At the bottom is sales. There's just the putting a person-to-person discussion going in one flavor or another to make that work. Marketing analytics is its own branch because we are now at this stage where the analytics that you're doing not only justify what's working and not working, but you can actually get competitive advantage if your marketing analytics has moved farther enough down the as part of your model and as far as what you're doing. And we can dig in more to that. And then pretty much everything else, all the classic marketing stuff. For that, we've grabbed SpinSuck's Ginny Dietrich's Peso framework, which is paid, earned, shared, and owned. But basically all the content that you create, the content creation is its whole huge branch of the tree. And a lot of these efforts can take a lot of time and resources to become to generate positive ROI and get things moving. But so with this list here, you would end up picking 3 out of here for your start to get going and continue to work through the table as you go.
How do I know which 3 to start? There's a lot in here.
There is. And this is one thing that they make no bones about this, is that there's no way to know. You have to jump in there and just start doing it. You have to start running these programs. And the good thing is, like with social and display ads, right? You can run ads for a week. You can put $400 into it in a week and just see if it gives you any lift or not. And that'll, let you decide whether you want to go forward with it or not. Now, most products are going to be having some kind of website, right? So you basically, by default, are going to be doing some SEO and some content on the website. Most businesses are going to try and build their community around email marketing. So you're going to have some kind of email functions going on. So that's 2 right there. So you really have very little wiggle room as you get started. It's going to be challenging to narrow it down to 3 and figure out which way to go. The only other thing that they were very clear about is it tends to happen that whenever you go into any organization, if you go to the whole team and say, okay, what should the 3 be? Usually 2 of the 3 everybody's in sync on. People know that, yeah, these are the things that we're doing right now that are working. And so it's the 3rd one that you have to go. But again, you can do, because you're small and agile, 1 week cycles. Try something for a week and see if it does anything. And if it doesn't, well, then you rotate 1 of the 3 out and just keep working your way through the pile. But so this is great because it gives you, at the beginning of the year, you can say, okay, here's what we've got in mind. Here's how fast the cycles are going to be. Maybe map out the next 3 or 4 you want to test as things fail, and at least gives you a structure, of what to do and where to go on that. And yeah, I can start to drill down further and we can kind of define these, unless, I don't know, Chris, is there a better way to go or any questions?
Yeah. So let's pretend, I'll make up something. I've got a new book coming out, right? I've got a new book, and it's okay. Whatever. How do I use this to make my dreams come true of that book being an Amazon top seller?
Right. Well, so for what you've got going on, obviously email marketing, right? You've got the Almost Timely list is massive. So that you just absolutely have to run.
Let's pretend I got none of that.
Oh, really? It's ground zero.
It's a startup. I got a brand new book, Pokemon for marketers, right? And no one's ever heard of me in the Pokemon space. What do I do? I've got the book. I'm sure it's gonna be pretty good, right? Snorlax is comparable to your nurturing campaigns, stuff like that. How do I take this and turn it into something useful?
Yeah. So if you're starting from ground zero, one place that is pretty easy to start is usually search engine marketing and social and display ads. So at least just get one of the SEO tools, run it through it, find out where are the websites that people are talking about this stuff. How hard is it going to be to, if you write 10 articles, are you going to get any traction on that? And, are people actually going to read your stuff? Do they want to hear about it? And then you can just force that traffic with ads. You want to take and buy a couple topics and throw them out there. And yeah, for something like a book, in fact, most of the most effective people I see in this front, they don't even write the book. They just start running ads for a couple weeks and say, hey, pre-order this book. It's about, do you love having Carmelian, decide your search strategy. Go ahead and pick here. And what they'll find is, some topics, yeah, you think they're cool, but you get absolutely 0 hits on the ads. And the other one, you do have go to the landing page, sign up to be notified when the book is published, which is you make some date that you're lying about that, you hope you're going to hit, but you're going to be 6 months late because books are always late. But by mining out ads is the way to at least get some instant feedback on where that's going.
So does that belong in product marketing then?
Well, that's, you hit a great point. And this stuff is really pretty mushy. The big thing is that you pick 3 and you stick with it, but kind of everything overlaps. Like search engine optimization. Yeah, that's marketing analytics, but really a ton of that is driven by content. Like you do have this, the site structure and technical issues, but then, a lot of that falls under the content marketing publishing text. So they can be all over the place. And yeah, they tend to kind of leach out of their buckets as they go. But yeah, you pretty much, again, the key is to pick 3 things to run with. The most important thing you don't want to do, if you're a marketing team of 1 or 2, you don't want to be checking in on 10 programs,
Right.
because a big part of that is that the trend that they saw over and over again is that these marketing programs have steep learning curves. Somebody who's done, social and display ads for a specific topic for 6 months is, 30 to 100 times more effective at running those ad campaigns than somebody that's doing it for the first week and the first time. You just learn so much as you go that starting really small and just getting super good in single channels is way more important than, sprinkling money around all over the place and just praying that stuff digs in. For the book one, events could be key. If there's a community, obviously for Pokemon, if you can, back in the day, in the time before when we used to go places, you could go to Pokemon Go events and things like that. And you'd have, give away a coupon for the book or whatever. And that could be a huge successful thing for you. On the book. Oh, go ahead.
How does the product marketing section fit into this? So I got the book, Pokemon for marketers, whatever. How do those pieces in that blue relate to it?
Right. So the big thing with the product marketing branch is, and it's at the top because these can be the most effective activities. Is there anything you can do with the product so that it will organically spread? Okay. So, all the social networks totally leverage this, right? As part of their engineering as marketing. When you sign on to the new social network, hey, upload your contact book, give us everybody. And so now every time you're sending a message to somebody, it's saying, hey, you're on head book, welcome, come invite your aunts and uncles and 65 people. And any of these organic things that are baked right into the product. A lot of it too is just share your results. You use X product, go ahead and publish your results to social. That's the kind of stuff that can give you exponential growth, because if something there works and it just spreads like wildfire on its own, you get like the Clubhouse effect. Who knows whether the app is really that good or not, but if everybody decides it's cool this week, you're going to get millions of downloads. And then a little bit of an angle on that is sometimes so engineering as marketing is when you're baking that stuff into the product, you also have existing platforms slide into that. So it's, for example, any B2B SaaS thing, sooner or later, you start to consider if it should have a HubSpot or a Salesforce integration. Mm-hmm. Because if you can latch onto another platform, that's just going to be, again, the bodies can just start pouring in from its own momentum. You don't even have to get involved. If you I'm trying to think of a good angle for Pokemon, if you could bake the Pokemon into Salesforce Trailblazer, where, additional Trailblazer badges include Pokemon, that would probably sell itself instantly. You could totally retire off that.
Follow offshore, pay attention.
Yeah. Let's do some gamification. Come on, get on board.
Okay. So assuming I've got a book that really isn't a whole lot I can engineer to it because it is just a pile of pages, right? Where does something like influencer marketing fit in here?
Yeah, so that influencer kind of is a little bit in between. That's classic awareness stuff. So it's either conventional PR or it's just your social. It's a matter of do you get somebody to help you out with that, or do you do it yourself? And in which case you'd be doing a ton of social. But yeah, that's for a book, that could be a killer one. If you find top players and get them to endorse your book and say that it's there. And some of that could drop down on the sales channel too, a good affiliate program. A lot of influencer marketing is actually just affiliate programs. It's not that they really like you that much, but if they're getting $2 a copy, suddenly you're going to find that they're willing to share it with everybody in the whole community, which can be great.
Gotcha.
Let me think. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. What else? Any other questions?
Well, so this is predicated on, I guess, this is much more of a tactical framework than is a strategic framework, right? Because this is like, where you're trying to go. Now, this is the map for how you're going to get there.
Yeah, and the big thing is this is presuming that there is a there. I hate to use that hackneyed phrase, but it's you've already done the homework, and I think a lot of the stuff you're going to talk about with lining up your strategy, but you're kind of placing all your bets that you've already got the ship pointed in the right direction, and it's just a matter of getting it moving faster. Because it will prove itself out really quickly if you pick 3 channels and hit 3 channels, once a week for 4 weeks, and you've gone through 12 channels and you're all at zeros. It's time to back up and do a different kind of analysis.
All right. So speaking of that, let's pivot to our friend, the SWOT analysis. Now, John, based on your past experience, what do you remember about SWOT analysis from like all those Harvard Business Review case studies we all had to read?
Oh, yeah. Well, the case studies are a big part of it. But for me, it's always, this is like the classic kickoff activity. They put the paper up on the easel, goes up at the once a year company meeting, and everybody runs through this. And I don't know. Looking back now, having more historical, understanding of things, like that's absolutely insane. Like, why the hell would you do that with the whole company on board? Like, that's for like a small group of managers to do and like figure out before you just throw it out to the rest of the world. So yeah, I guess that's I didn't realize the places that I was at were such a complete asylum. Because that just is total insanity. I think the other thing too, I know you and Katie have done a bunch of stuff with this, and most people don't do it properly. They screw up the threats and the opportunities. So I'm interested in you giving me the kind of the actual method that works, so we can get deeper.
Well, let's do the grumpy old man complaining about the world first. So this is an example. This is from a former team at an old company. This is a SWOT analysis somebody put together for starting up a new financial planning blog. And in that initial planning meeting, this team and the people who were on, I was a neutral observer, let's say, and this is what they came up with for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is what SWOT stands for. And they identified the strengths of this new blog content product. They have good subject matter experts and skilled writers on staff. The weaknesses: they had no advertising plan and unclear hosting. Namely, like they didn't know where they're going to make this thing live on their company's website. The opportunities were unique perspective, new spin on financial planning, and the threats were saturated market for financial blogs. Now, I'm going to tell you off the bat, this fails. This is an F. But what do you see here, John?
Yeah. Like this is all they're looking at their own company and saying, hey, these are our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats. You're supposed to be applying this to the market. Like this is what's happening in the world. And the opportunities are like, here's the things we can grab. And the threats are, here's the other people that are trying to grab it or structural problems with getting there. It seems like this is just this is more psychologist couch stuff than actually looking at what's going on in the market.
I'm going to actually take it a step even further down than that. This is a SWOT analysis. Let's go ahead and actually draw one up here. We're going to do the standard 2x2 matrix, right? Which is every consultant's favorite. And we're going to do strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. Here's mistake number one people make with SWOT analyses. They think it is just sort of this big amorphous thing. This is not what this is. SWOT analysis is you versus one other competitor. Because in order to be able to clarify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you need to have it be that specific. It is you versus one competitor of some kind. So that's mistake number one. You can't even really do it with the marketplace because the marketplace is kind of this big amorphous thing. It's like you and this other thing. So that's number one. Number two is, let's go change colors here. You're right. Strengths and weaknesses, that's us, right? So if I've got a new Pokemon book, right, that we've got a new podcast, or we're a consulting agency. What are our strengths, the things that we're good at? What are our weaknesses, the things that we are bad at? And these are the things that are theoretically under our control. So if I'm putting out, we've got a marketing podcast, right? Like Marketing Over Coffee, our strength. is that we've been doing this show for, one of our strengths, we've been doing this show for 15 years now. We've amassed a large audience. We have a consistent format and a publishing schedule. These are all things that our customers would find valuable. Our weaknesses, we probably don't advertise enough, right? We don't really, because it's not a full-time job, we don't have a full-time marketing plan behind it, right? We just kind of do things. And there's not a lot of order or structure to it. I mean, the show does well for sure, but it probably could be bigger if these things that were innate to our practices didn't stand in our way. Now, from your perspective, thinking about the podcast, because I think that's a good example. What are some of the other strengths and weaknesses that are unique to Marketing Over Coffee?
The community is huge on the strength side. It's the fact that we both in our own careers too have been doing the same network and building the same audience. So that's a big deal. But yeah, it's interesting that the space has changed in that, I think a strength was being an early adopter, coming in and being able to kind of build things up before it goes. But now that almost goes into a weakness now, in that, well, I guess that's more of a threat too, but it's just the landscape has changed. It's far more difficult for us to cut through the clutter, just because there's so many other different outlets out there, and guest fatigue and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, I would say being early, I don't think belongs in either, because it's not something we have control over. Like, we can't control that we were or were not early. And in a lot of ways, it doesn't really matter. Our community absolutely is under our control. How much we choose to do our community to nurture our community. The same is true for like the Analytics for Marketers Slack. We have that community is an advantage, it's a strength, but it is also something that we have to actively work on. It just doesn't happen. Our audience, same thing. So what other things under our control do we either have? Do we do well, or do we do poorly?
Yeah. Community can even be sliced up a couple of ways, because it's listeners, and then it's also guests and experts. We have a Rolodex of people that can come on as guests and are willing to talk to us. And then, yeah, we do have track record of, understanding what makes a great story and puts together a compelling episode. You could call that hosting skill or whatever you want to call that. But that is definitely something that we kind of already know what works and doesn't work compared to a lot of the other stuff out there.
What would you put on the weakness side?
Yeah, I was just thinking of a weakness. Again, it's a weakness that we have control over and could make easier. Yeah, I get, just pure on budget. If we were to, have a market, a 6-figure marketing plan to promote the thing, that would be a big deal. Also, I've always wanted to do more work as far as becoming part of a network. Do we need to, is it possible to, and the whole space is going through this, but like, it just seems obvious that if 6 or 7 shows on similar topics could align, and they would just benefit from doing that kind of stuff, but there's just not enough. I don't know. For most properties, it's just too much of a struggle just to get the show out the door. So there's not enough strategy going on.
Right. Yeah, I would put that into partnerships. Okay, now let's pick a competitor, so a competing show for whom we compete with audience with. Technically, in the podcasting space, that's literally everybody else, right? So that's Joe Rogan, that's all the entire space. Let's pick one in particular. I'm going to go with like Gary Vaynerchuk, because easy, prominent person, and that's going to be our competitor. Here's where SWOT analysis goes wrong. These threats and opportunities, we think of them as these weird, crazy externalities, when really all this is our competitors' strengths and our competitors' weaknesses, right? So now we are doing the inverse exercise here. So for Gary's show, he's got a huge audience, right? He's got a fantastic audience. He is a content machine. So he has a content velocity that is out of this world. He has staff. He has 27 staff just responsible for producing his stuff alone, which is just nutty. Just the idea of having a 5-man camera crew following you around all day, recording every single thing you do is slightly odd. but it works. And distribution, right? So because he's got this large network, he's got a distribution pretty well handled, and he spends money like crazy. So he's got a huge ad budget. He on his stuff is spending on one of his recent podcasts was saying he spends a couple $100,000 a month on just promoting his stuff, and he doesn't care about the results at all. He's like, I just need to see eyeballs on my stuff. I don't care who it is. He has a kids show and stuff. He's like, I just want people paying attention to my stuff. So weaknesses, things that are under his control. Because of this, he inherently has a lack of focus, right? Just try everything to see what's working, which means that there's also a lot of waste, right? If you're, building a kids show for marketing, and you're expecting, you're trying to build cartoons and comic books and stuff about your personal IP. That's a reasonable 15 to 20 year plan, because a kid who's 10 today who becomes an entrepreneur at 30, yeah, if you are still alive, then that may be a good bet, but it's a little bit tough. And because of the way that he does his content, there is a lack of originality. If you watch his YouTube channel, you don't need to listen to his podcast, right? If you read his blog, you don't need to watch his YouTube channel and stuff. Because he's repurposing all the time, it's pretty much the same stuff in every channel. And so if you're trying to make a podcast successful, there should be something there that you can't get other places. Now, from a big picture perspective, because of the size of the strengths that he's working with, his strengths greatly outpower his weaknesses, right? He's been enormously successful in leveraging his networks. But the next step in a SWOT analysis is to say, okay, what are the things here that cancel each other out, right? Are there things that, when we look at our strengths versus his weaknesses, do they map well? We do have good focus, right? So that is something that we can double down on because we have focus. He doesn't necessarily. We don't have a lot of waste because we don't spend that much to begin with, right? But that is something here on this side. We say, okay, this is something we need to do more of because yes, he's wasting money, but just that sheer distribution is working for him. So that's kind of a thing that I would say we add a +1 on priority there. Lack of originality. Again, this is a good one for us. Our content is good. When you do the guests for Marketing Over Coffee, how do you decide what you're going to talk about? Is it like, I guess the thing I would say is when you watch, say, like Melissa Benoist promoting her new book, and you check out the Kelly Clarkson show and Ellen and Oprah, it's literally the same 7 questions she gets asked all the time. How did you come up with the idea for this book? So if you watched one, you don't need to watch the others. Whereas a show like Hot Ones, the way Sean Evans does his interviewing, he does a crap ton of research, and he's always asking questions that you've not heard on other shows. So when you do the guests with Marketing Over Coffee, how original are the guests' answers?
Yeah, it's the same thing like you were talking about with Hot Wings, and it doesn't scale that well. But it is the fact that, like, I've read the books. I always talk about how other interviews start with page 1. I usually start with page 250. Like the best things you can get from an author. Because people don't realize this. When a book is finally in readers' hands, the author has moved on for a full year. So the question of like, okay, now that you've finished this book, like, what are you working on now? That's actually an answer that they're not going to give to all those other interviews, because the other ones are they're going to have to start from page 1. Like, oh, so what's this book about anyways? So yeah, that is one thing, is to do a lot more research and qualification, and taking more of an NPR approach to the interviews.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then for the segments that we do, how would you again, there's stuff that we'll see in, let's say, like search engine land or things like that. How would you improve that so that was even more original? So even if you read the article in search engine land, listening to the show would be of benefit.
Yeah, I think that's, one is that stuff is being curated. So it's, you don't have to read all the articles. We're going through and we're giving you the 10 most important ones for this week. And then it's also the gut check on, we can actually provide additional commentary to, as far as, yeah, no, we've tried that, and that's a bunch of baloney, and or that, yes, that does really work, and you need to do it. So yeah, that's a very specialized info that we're adding onto that, and yeah, there's definitely value in there. Somebody that listens to us for 20 minutes is basically saving themselves, an hour and a half of combing through other outlets or trying to test stuff on their own.
Right. Okay. So what we're starting to get at now in terms of this framework is it's no longer just a laundry list of random post-its, which is what it always ends up being, like some 2-day strategic plan. You have a wall with post-its all over it, and you're like, and now what? We're starting to outline the things that we can do, because remember, this is all about control. We have no control over what Gary Vaynerchuk does. Just like we have no control over what Accenture does, as when we're speaking from Trust Insights. We have no control. If you're McDonald's, you have no control over what Burger King does. But we have full control over these things. So based on these weaknesses we've identified and these strengths, we can say, okay, we need, as an action plan, let's go with green here. We need to increase our originality and research. We need to continue to improve the value of our content, but we're doing okay on experts. We need to improve more of our community, because community is something that Gary does pretty well too, but we need to find our niche, something there that he doesn't have and doesn't care about. Because again, if you're a small company going up a big one, you're not going to take on the big one on a face-to-face punching match and win. The same is true for audience. The audience can be better. On the weaknesses side, the budget is one thing. We probably need an actual marketing plan.
Right.
With things like KPIs, so that when you see other shows talking about, the size of their audience, we can differentiate and say, yes, we have 20,000 listeners. We don't have 20 million, but 15 of those 20,000 are the buyers for the people who choose to advertise with the show. So if the goal is to make money, we can say, yes, it's not as big, but it is substantially better quality than a different show. What else would you say prioritize here on the weaknesses side?
I think that's pretty tough, because as I'm going back now, even though we don't have the classic business plan, there has been, I am picking off the 3 campaigns because we've been doing PR, over the past 2 years now. I've actually been doing paid interviews on other casts. And so we're starting to figure out if that works or not. Paid ad campaigns have been running over the past year. So that's been working. And then after that, it's some SEO, keeping the website in order. But I think, and that's actually one that can go up on the strengths is, having 15 years of posts up on the website. There's a ton of content up there. And so, maybe 20% of the transcripts have been done. Like the rest of the transcripts need to be done. There's other things that we need to do to generate more traffic to the site and to get that going. Other action stuff. I do always have my ear to the ground with partnership stuff, but that's not entirely in our control. I'm not going to start up the partner program myself. That's for sure. So it's more just a listening thing.
Yep. So now what we've done here, and we actually probably should have done this in reverse order, but that's fine, is we've identified the strategic imperatives using the SWOT analysis if our goal is to deal with the Gary Vaynerchuk show. Now, if we want to talk about the landscape as a whole, this would not be the right framework. Something like Porter's 5 Forces would be the better framework, because it's intended to talk about what's happening in the landscape as a whole. Podcasting as a whole is changing. SWOT is for, you need to take a baseball bat to a specific competitor's knees. You need to somehow get advantage in the space, especially if it's a single larger competitor of some kind. And this is the way to use it. And then once you've got that, then you take those bullet lists of, okay, we need to improve our interview content. We need to improve our SEO. We need to assign some marketing KPIs, and now we can map it to traction. So based on that, like one of the first things that would come to mind is, okay, we're not going to do partnerships, but how can we do that product marketing, that engineering as marketing, and turn that into, how do we build that into the show?
Yeah. And now when you end up doing this, when clients want this kind of analysis, then, so are you going in and usually doing it for 3 or 4 competitors to get a better picture of the space, or how does that usually work?
It depends. It really depends on the client, because if it's, and how much creep they have. The question that we always like to ask people is, who do you lose to in RFPs, right? Or in sales pitches. So like back when Katie and I worked at a PR agency, we lost to Golan Harris and Edelman, but mostly Golan Harris, because Edelman, there were a lot of client pitches we were in where like, the budget wouldn't even get Edelman out of bed. But Golan Harris was one of the big ones. And so that was the first thing, was to say, okay, well, what specifically why are we losing to them? And you can do this for a lot of competitors, but once you get above 2 or 3, then you start saying, you know what, you need to do a Porter's 5 forces first, because it's pretty clear you don't understand the space. There's something in the space itself you don't understand. And then once you understand the space, your SWOT analysis gets better, because you can discount all those distractions that are in the space and say, okay, what specifically does this competitor do in the context of the field that they're doing better, that we're losing to them on sales pitches?
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that, having that be sales driven. Yeah, because any semi-mature company has a couple of thorns that they're always complaining about.
Oh yeah, totally. And one of the things that you hear a lot in PR, and I know it drives PR practitioners up a wall, is when somebody asks, like, who are your competitors, and a company inanely says, we're so unique, we have no competitors.
Yeah, there's no competition, right?
There's no competition, which is code for we have a product nobody wants.
Yeah, we don't know what the hell's going on at all.
Exactly. So if you were to, in a case like that, that's again one of those warning signs where the framework you have to work with is not the right one, because it's clear that this is something that somebody doesn't quite understand. It's like when you look at Porter's 5 forces. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. You're looking at things like, is this the right one? The right spot here. I think I am. No, that's Levitt's diamond framework. Yeah, I think this is Porter's 5. No, that's not Porter's 5 forces. I'll have to go look it up somewhere. Oh, there it is. So your bargaining power of suppliers, threat of substitutes, threat of new entrants, and bargaining power of buyers. So in a case like a podcast, your bargaining power of buyers is your audience. Namely, how easy is it for an audience to switch? How much power do they have over you, right? In podcasting, it's super easy. That drive time slot, or that time in the gym, they got 40 minutes to listen to 2 shows. Is your show going to be one of them? If your show is like 2 hours long,
probably not. Yeah.
You are at risk to that bargaining power of buyers. The same for threat of substitutes, right? Again, is there another show, and this is where your unique selling proposition comes in, is there another show that does what you do, but does it better, faster, cheaper? With podcasts, it's a quality issue, right? Like you were saying with interviews, and this goes back to that SWOT analysis. If the quality of the interview is so good that you can't get that anywhere else, you're going to watch that. Again, I look at Sean Evans and Hot Ones. Hot Ones is a brilliant show because nobody else can do that. Even if you were to come up with like a ridiculous, like, similar concept, like, you have to cut onions for an entire hour while we're asking these questions. It comes across as a terrible knockoff, as opposed to like, okay, let's torment people we know or people we're familiar with as celebrities by making them eat increasingly, spicy food, and then try to keep their composure. There's very little threat of substitute there.
Yeah, no, they've totally locked that down. That show is amazing.
Exactly. And so with a podcast, it's like, okay, are there threat of substitutes? Yeah, there's a ton of threats. The bargaining power of suppliers is an interesting one for podcasting, because there isn't really a supplier in the traditional sense, but for us, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier, SEO is a big deal, right? And this is where an attribution model is really important for your marketing, because your attribution model is your supplier model. I say it again, your attribution model is your supplier model. The channels that are in your attribution model are supplying you with audience. That, as a marketer, is your raw material, attention. So what bargaining power do suppliers have?
That's really interesting, though. Yeah, because so that kind of goes into the idea, of what Gary Vaynerchuk is doing. Like, he has this huge machine with millions of people in it. So his bargaining power with his suppliers, his suppliers are serving it up to him easily. Whereas trying to generate that crowd, that's an interesting point to think about too. All the celebrity podcasts, they show up with a crowd behind them, so that the money that they have to put into that to make that work is just significantly less.
Except in Gary's case, he has to spend a couple $100,000 a month to keep that audience, right? So his suppliers actually have a fair amount of power over him. But for us, in marketing, with things like SEO, Google has enormous power over us, right? Google, one change in the search listings and you are gone, right? You've vanished. So that's something that has to be considered. And again, going back to the SWOT analysis, that 15-year history does matter, because from Google's perspective of expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, a new show starting up that didn't have a big ad budget or something would be at a substantial disadvantage to an existing well-established show, because we have built that content authority with Google, and we have a little bit of power with that supply. Not much, but a little bit. And then, of course, the threat of new entrants has been the story for the last 4 years in podcasting, because every person and their cousin has attempted to start a podcast. Now, the good news is they last for 3 episodes for the most part, and they're like, oh, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, it's free to start a bad podcast.
Exactly. So Porter's 5 Forces is a model I think you should probably do before you do a SWOT analysis, so that you understand, what does the landscape look like? How much of a buzzsaw are we walking face first into? And then once you've done this, then you do a SWOT analysis that helps you understand that specific competitor. Then you have you from your SWOT analysis, you pull all those pieces out. That's your punch list that goes into traction.
Yeah, I like it. It's a full ramp. That's enough you can at least convince your boss you have some idea, what the hell you're doing for 2022.
Exactly. So that's today's show. We looked at the 3 frameworks, really. What to do with the analysis, and then turning that into a measurable strategy. And remember, as you look at something, we talked about this with Porter's 5 Forces a little bit. We talked about it a lot more here with the SWOT analysis, in terms of these are specific things like the community that is measurable. Like, you can measure community numbers, community engagement, your budget spend, your cost per acquisition. All these things have KPIs attached to them. And then once you go into traction, you're talking about now very specific metrics, your email marketing, click-through rates, and stuff like that. So if you follow this process, you can quickly identify, okay, here are the things that we need to pay attention to. Here's what we need to do, and here's how we measure each of those things. But if you would prefer to have someone talk to you about it, let us know. We're happy to help out. So any final parting words, John?
No, just, make sure you get your paperwork ahead of time before you get asked for it. That makes life much easier.
All right. So with that, we will, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analyticsformarketers. See you next time.